Okay. So our next technology presentation will be by Mr. Satya Gupta, CTO and founder of VerseX. Mr. Satya Gupta is VerseX visionary founder with over 25 years of expertise in embedded systems, network security, and systems architecture. Mr. Satya has helped build and guide the company through key growth phases from initial funding in 2015, developing core technology with key partners including Raytheon and Lockheed from 2016 to 2018, to launching an enterprise class GA product in 2019. Now, the topic for our presentation will be the need for effective runtime protection to protect the financial sector. Now over to Mr. Satya Gupta for the presentation. So if you can just share your screen.
Aman, can you see my screen, right?
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Great. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. This is Satya from VerseX. Greetings from California. I'd like to be able to spend a few minutes on the need for effective runtime protection for financial sector. So I won't bother you with too much details out here. We all know how the attackers are getting smarter, faster, and the existing solutions are not coming up and being able to do their job. We can see the number of incidents going up. The consequence on the financial sector is that the customers' trust is eroding because they're losing their confidential account information, their personal data, and sensitive customer transactions are getting public. And on the service provider side, they're looking at steep fines. So now let's look at what's happening with how are the attackers getting smarter and how the tools that we use currently are falling short. So in the good old days, from the very beginning when the Morris worm was first invented in the 1980s, to almost like the 2015-ish kind of time frame, we see that conventional malware, which is basically pieces of malware, and a lot of that malware is getting thrown out into the internet every day. Some estimate 350,000 pieces of malware are released. But what these malware do is when they work on the server, they kind of burrow into legitimate processes and start stealing data, credentials, confidential information, injecting DLLs or libraries into those processes and doing nasty things. So, what the industry did is they kind of created these file reputation gateways which could recognize dominant forms of malware. And what that did is it kind of slowed down the attacks a little bit, but not a whole lot, because the attackers came back with the second round of living off the land kind of attacks, in which they'd use legitimate executable like PowerShell to run scripts. And the scripts were not really not traceable into the file reputation gateway. So this particular mechanism became a dominant form of attack since 2016. In essence, they did the same thing. There were these legitimate processes that were being attacked by these malicious processes that you see here in red. But the attackers have started becoming even smarter. Now, what they're doing is, as we saw with Sunburst, with Solar Winds, and the Sunburst attack and the Supernova attack, and also the Kaseya attack recently. As soon as a zero-day vulnerability was announced, the attackers were there and they were exploiting attacks from by sending malicious data and gaining keyboard control. So this is really a nasty problem. If you're not inside the application's runtime, you will not be able to detect these kind of attacks. And this is why the attackers are succeeding. So if we are all familiar with the skill chain, there's a 7-stage process that occurs. At stage 4 is where the vulnerability gets exploited, and at stage 7 is where the bad actors achieving their objectives. The two places where the attacks could be detected is, as I mentioned, stage 4 and stage 7. A lot of our existing solutions are detecting it now, even beyond stage 7. Once the attackers become done a whole bunch of things, the thresholds of all kinds of vulnerabilities, all kinds of thresholds are being violated. At that point in time, EDR solutions will pick attacks up. And as we can see, at the same time, the attackers are getting smarter and smarter. They're now even building backdoors into the code. Common off-the-shelf software and open source software has vulnerabilities, and they're exploding and they're getting exploited within hours of the vulnerability getting reported. The only recourse that right now people have is to be able to go and patch their solution, but it takes at least 48 hours. So how do you save yourself in those 48 hours? One of the things that is happening is that the attackers are now launching attacks a lot more sooner. The very first thing that they'll do in stage 7 is to start encrypting your software or start stealing credentials, and all it takes is only 3 seconds. If your EDR solution or your any solution out there is not working fast enough in those 3 seconds, if they're not there, then game's over at that point in time. We've seen that the a dominant EDR solution has tweeted out that how it takes them 36 minutes versus 6.75 days for the rest of the industry to be able to figure an attack. 36 minutes compared to 3 seconds is a lifetime. So the best EDR solution is not able to keep up with these ransomware attacks. And so the only way to deal with this is to have a application aware cybersecurity solution that can stop attacks at stage 4. If you let the attack progress to stage 7 or later, game's over. There's no stopping it. So if you look at how things are, the attacker is constantly bombarding an application that is being shown in this red box out here. They're sending very smart attacks, and what are we doing in return? We are basically deploying IPSs, WAFs, and all that. Hopefully, they are able to stop those attacks. But as you can see, that's not really working very well. And the attack sailing right through the application, and it becomes very hard to defend it. What's happening now is with the application aware solutions like VerseX, we are able to recognize when the application is being attacked, and we can stop these attacks in real time, without ever them reaching to the stage 7, where exfiltration or any bad objectives that we saw in the cyber kill chain in the previous slide are actually achieved. So if you look at what the attacker is doing, is the attacker is sending this maliciously crafted data in those attacks. It sails right through the network. IDS, IPS, WAPs, all of them are unable to discern those because these payloads are heavily encrypted and encoded, and they're very clever. They'll just look like zeros and ones on the network, and there's nothing bad about it at all. So what they do is they'll come to the application. The application is normally running on its guardrail that the developer has laid out. But what the attacker does is they basically are able to use this malicious payload. They convert it into code in runtime, and that's where it starts serving the objectives of the attacker. So this transition is what we have. If these application-aware tools are able to detect this transition. So how do they do that? They'll actually use application control kind of mechanisms to guardrail what gets loaded in memory. But just because now you have some pristine code loaded in memory does not mean that that code cannot be abused. We saw that with SolarWinds, with Kaseya, and all perfectly good pieces of code being abused. What you really need is the ability to look at application aware guardrails that are basically can spot this transition. And this is the only way you can block these very sophisticated attacks, such as blind drop, buffer and heap overflow attacks, library injection attacks, a very sophisticated SQL injection, OS command, object deserialization kind of attacks. This is the only way to be able to stop them. And this is where, if you can stop it here, then we're stopping it at stage 4 of the cyber kill chain as opposed to stage 7. So how do we look at if you look at the VerseX solution, it has been battle tested. We've actually had an agency, actually a federal agency in the US, actually send 200 very sophisticated attackers, some of the smartest attackers in the world. We've defended ourselves against 15,000 attacks that were made in about 20 hours. So it's battle tested. The solution works for any application, whether it's a SCADA application, legacy application, custom, COTS, no matter what kind of application, whether it's running in the cloud or container or on VMs or on-premises. So in the central concept, this guardrail that I was talking about in the previous slide, we like to call it app map. This is our trademark term out here for those application aware maps. Essentially, what these do is basically constrain the application along whatever the developer has laid out as being the strategy. So we can work in any environment for any application, and we are able to offer real-time protection. We are able to stop the attacks at stage 4 rather than stage 7. We also produce deep forensics, and so one of the big problems that most other solutions have is that they need human curation. In our case, there is no human curation involved. The attacks come with very, very detailed information, including IP of the attacker, the session IP, which variable in your web application is being attacked, and such like. So as a result, we've seen with our customers that there's an 87% improvement in their ROI. We even have compensating controls, which will basically on every day basis, any new vulnerability that gets declared, your application is automatically protected against that. So this helps with the compliance also. We are constantly updated and patched. It's like a virtual patching that actually protects the application without you are having to deploy patches. Patching, as we all know, is a horrendously tedious exercise, and it opens the door. Those 48 hours in which you apply the patch are highly critical. Even in those 48 hours, the VerseX solution keep you protected. So the way we have to think about VerseX is that you have your customers, you have your application workloads, depending on what kind of workload they are. What we do next is we'll orchestrate, what we call a sensor in your workloads, and we also have the security platform, which is composed of some VMs that we call analysis engines, and our management console. So what happens is that we, as the application load, we build what we call the app maps. Then the sensor starts sending some runtime analysis, and basically it makes sure that the application is running on its guardrails, much like a GPS can ensure that you are driving on the course that you laid out for yourself. So as soon as the course deviates, the GPS warns you. Just like that, the combination of the sensor and the runtime analysis, which is done on a separate VM, is announces that there is a problem, and when there is a problem, our protection kicks in within milliseconds. So not days and weeks and 36 minutes later or 3 seconds later, but milliseconds later. So what that does is it locks out the attacker, and allows us to keep your application safe and help us achieve our mission, which is basically we make cyber threats irrelevant. And we can also publish all of these analytics into your SIM, SOC, in your SOAR platform, so that you can actually see what the attacker is doing. And so this solution has been recognized. John Chambers, who's on our advisory board, has actually gone on air in CNBC and a whole bunch of other places. And he has actually said, very clearly recognized, that the VerseX is the only company that can actually recognize some of these biggest attacks that they are being rolled out from our unfriendly states, essentially. Another gentleman who's very deeply connected with us is Jim Routh. He's actually the former CISO of Mass Mutual, Aetna, CVS, JP Morgan, and KPMG. And he's gone on record and saying, VerseX is ahead of everyone else in this space. So that's all I have for this presentation. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me. I greatly appreciate. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you, Mr. Satya Gupta, for a wonderful presentation about your company and everything you just spoke about. It was really insightful, and I'm sure our viewers learned a lot from this. We'd once again like to thank you for coming for our summit. Mr. Satya Gupta, Chief Technology Officer, founder VerseX. This is a small token of our appreciation from our side. So thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you.
We would now have a short break of about 25 minutes, and we would return at 2:15 for our next technology presentation. So stay tuned, viewers, and see you again at 2:15. Thank you.